My son bought a brand new Mercedes-Benz for his gold digger fiancée, then handed me $100,000 in bills to pay. "You've saved enough, it's time to help the family out," he said. I refused, so he sued me for $280K. But when I walked into court, the judge froze. "Wait, you're... I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I never expected my 61st birthday to end with my own son threatening to destroy me. But there I was, standing in my modest living room, watching Sean pace back and forth like a caged animal while his fiancée sat primly on my couch, her manicured fingers drumming against her designer purse. "Mom, you're being unreasonable," Sean said, his voice carrying that entitled tone I'd been hearing more frequently since he started dating Brittany. "We're not asking for charity here. We're family." I gripped my coffee mug tighter, the ceramic warm against my palms. The birthday cake I'd bought for myself sat untouched on the kitchen counter, its cheerful pink frosting now seeming almost mocking. "Sean, you're asking me for $100,000 to pay off a car loan, a car you bought for someone you've known for 8 months. Brittany's perfectly glossed lips curved into what might have been a smile on someone else, but on her looked more like a smirk. "Mrs. Patterson, I understand your concern, but Sean and I are building a future together. The Mercedes was an investment in our relationship." "An investment?" I almost laughed. The woman was 26 years old, had never held a job for more than 6 months, and somehow convinced my son to buy her a car worth more than most people's annual salary. I'd raised Sean to be smarter than this, but apparently a pretty face and batting eyelashes could override 3 decades of common sense. "Brittany," I said, keeping my voice level, "I worked 2 jobs for 15 years to put Sean through college. I've helped him with his rent, his credit card debt, and even his failed business ventures. But this is different." Sean stopped pacing and whirled around to face me. "Different how? Because you don't like Brittany?" "I don't know Brittany well enough to like or dislike her," I replied truthfully. "But I know manipulation when I see it." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Brittany's expression hardened and something flickered in her eyes that made my instincts prickle. It was a look I recognized from my past, though Sean had no idea why I'd be able to read people so well. Manipulation? Brittany stood up slowly, smoothing down her expensive dress. "Mrs. Patterson, I think you're projecting. Just because you've spent your life alone doesn't mean every woman is trying to take advantage of your son." The casual cruelty in her voice hit its mark, but I'd heard worse. Much worse. "I've been alone by choice, Brittany. There's a difference." Sean ran his hands through his hair, a gesture he'd inherited from his father. "Mom, look, I know you've got the money. You've been saving for years, living in this tiny apartment, driving that old Honda. When are you going to start enjoying life? When are you going to help your family enjoy life?" "This isn't about the money, Sean." "Isn't it?" Brittany interjected, pulling out her phone. "Because I've done some research on your finances, Mrs. Patterson. You've got quite a nest egg tucked away." My blood turned to ice. "Excuse me?" "Oh, don't look so shocked," she continued, scrolling through something on her screen. "It's amazing what you can find out about someone these days. Property records, old employment information, investment accounts. You've been very modest about your actual worth." Sean looked between us, confusion clouding his features. "What's she talking about, Mom?" I set my mug down carefully, my hands steadier than they had any right to be. 25 years of hiding, 25 years of careful anonymity, and this little gold digger thought she could waltz in and expose everything with a few internet searches. "Brittany," I said quietly, "I think you should be very careful about what you think you know." She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, I know plenty. I know about your old job, your old life. I know why you really moved to this little nowhere town when Sean was 7. Very interesting reading." Sean's face had gone pale. "Mom? What is she talking about?" My chest tightened. I'd spent decades protecting him from the truth, building a simple life where he could grow up normal and safe. But apparently, the past had a way of finding you, no matter how far you ran or how well you hid. Sean, I began, but Brittany cut me off. She's talking about the fact that your mother isn't the poor, struggling single mom she's pretended to be, Brittany said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. She's talking about the fact that she's been lying to you your entire life. The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Sean's eyes darted between me and Brittany, searching for answers I wasn't ready to give. Not like this. Not with her watching like a vulture waiting to pick clean the bones of our relationship. I think, I said slowly, standing up and moving toward the door, that this conversation is over. But Sean didn't move. No, I want answers. Brittany, what exactly did you find? She smiled then, and it was the coldest thing I'd seen in years. Let's just say your mother has some very interesting connections. People who might be surprised to learn where Joanne Patterson ended up. The name hit me like a physical blow, not because it was wrong, but because it was almost right. Close enough to terrify me, close enough to make me realize that this wasn't random curiosity. This was targeted. Get out, I whispered. Mom? Sean stepped toward me, concern, replacing confusion in his voice. What's going on? Why do you look like you've seen a ghost? Because I had. The ghost of a life I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself it never existed. The ghost of decisions I'd made to keep us both safe. Decisions that had cost me everything I'd once been. Sean, I said, my voice stronger now. I need you both to leave. Now. We're not going anywhere until you write that check, Brittany said, crossing her arms. Not after what I know? And if I don't? Her smile widened. Then maybe it's time your son learned the truth about who his mother really is. And maybe some other people should know where to find you. The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas. Sean looked completely lost, caught between a woman he thought he loved and a mother he suddenly realized he might not know at all. You have 48 hours, Brittany continued, gathering her purse. $100,000, or I start making some very interesting phone calls. She headed for the door, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Mrs. Patterson? Don't even think about running again. Some people have very long memories. After they left, I stood alone in my living room, surrounded by the debris of my carefully constructed life. The birthday cake still sat on the counter, its cheerful message now seeming like a cruel joke. 61 years old, and my past had finally caught up with me. I walked to my bedroom and knelt beside the bed, reaching underneath to pull out a small metal box I hadn't opened in 15 years. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents that proved Brittany had only scratched the surface of who I really was. The question now was whether I was ready to become that person again, to protect my son from the consequences of my choices. Because Brittany had made one crucial mistake in her research. She'd found out about my past, but she had no idea what I was capable of in the present. The lawsuit papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by a courier who barely looked old enough to drive. I signed for them with hands that didn't shake, though inside I felt like I was falling through space. Patterson versus Patterson. My own son was suing me for $280,000. I sat at my kitchen table reading through the legal documents with the kind of careful attention I hadn't used in decades. The complaint alleged breach of familial financial obligation and emotional distress caused by parental neglect. Attached were bank statements that Brittany had somehow obtained, highlighting my savings and investments, painting me as a wealthy woman hoarding money while her son struggled. The struggling son who drove a 2-year-old BMW and lived in a downtown loft that cost more per month than most people's mortgages. My phone had been ringing all morning. I'd ignored the first 6 calls from Sean, but when my sister Margaret called from Phoenix, I knew the poison had started, spreading. Joanne, what in God's name is going on? Margaret's voice was sharp with worry. I just got off the phone with Sean. He's saying you refuse to help him and his fiancée, that you've been hiding money from him for years. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. It's complicated, Maggie. Complicated? He's your son. He says he's taking you to court because you won't help pay for some car. Since when do you have the kind of money that would make this worth suing over? Since always, I wanted to say. Since before you knew me as the quiet single mother who moved to Millbrook with a 7-year-old boy and a story about escaping an abusive relationship. Since before I became Joanne Patterson, suburban nobody. I have some savings, I said instead. Some savings? Margaret's voice rose. Sean is talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where did that money come from, Joanne? I closed my eyes. Even my own sister, the only family I had left besides Sean, didn't know the truth. I'd been so careful, so thorough in bearing my past, that sometimes I almost forgot it myself. I have to go, Maggie. I'll call you later. Joanne, wait. I hung up and immediately dialed my lawyer's office. Patricia Hendricks had handled my divorce from Sean's father 28 years ago, back when she was a junior associate and I was still someone else. She was one of the few people who knew pieces of my real story, though not all of it. Patricia, it's Joanne Patterson. I need to see you today. Joanne? My God, it's been years. What's wrong? You sound terrible. My son is suing me. I need representation. There was a pause. Your son, Sean, the one you put through college? The same one. Can you see me this afternoon? Of course. Come in at 3. And Joanne? Bring whatever documentation you have. All of it. All of it. Patricia had no idea what she was asking for. After I hung up, I went back to the bedroom and pulled out the metal box again. This time, I spread everything on my bed, Social Security cards in 3 different names, birth certificates, driver's licenses, and employment records that told the story of a woman who had died on paper 25 years ago. Janet Morrison, private investigator specializing in corporate fraud and domestic surveillance, licensed in 4 states with commendations from 3 police departments. The woman who had saved the wrong person's life and ended up needing to disappear. I picked up the newspaper clipping I'd kept all these years, yellowed and fragile. Local PI instrumental in corruption case. There was my picture, younger, sharper, wearing a confidence I'd spent decades learning to hide. The article detailed how my investigation had brought down a city councilman who'd been taking bribes from construction companies. What the article didn't mention was that the councilman had powerful friends who didn't appreciate having their business, arrangements disrupted, friends who made it clear that Janet Morrison's continued existence was problematic. So, Janet Morrison died in a car accident, her body never recovered from the river, and 6 months later, Joanne Patterson moved to Millbrook with her son, a modest insurance settlement, and a determination to live quietly. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brittany thought she was so clever digging up information about Joanne Patterson. She had no idea she was threatening someone who had once made a living finding people who didn't want to be found. My phone buzzed with a text from Sean. Mom, call me. We need to talk before this gets worse. Before this gets worse, as if suing your own mother wasn't already rock bottom. I was about to respond when another text came through, this one from a number I didn't recognize. Joanne Patterson, or should I say Janet Morrison? Interesting how far you've fallen. Perhaps we should meet. My blood turned to ice. I stared at the message, reading it 3 times before my brain could process what I was seeing. Someone else knew. Someone besides Brittany had connected the dots between my current life and my past. The phone buzzed again. Coffee shop on Main Street. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., come alone or your son learns everything. And I mean everything. I set the phone down with trembling hands. 25 years of hiding, of building a safe life for Sean, and now it was all unraveling. But as I sat there surrounded by the documents of my former life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Not fear, not anymore. Anger. Pure, cold, calculating anger at these people who thought they could threaten my family and walk away unscathed. Brittany might have done her research, but she'd made a fundamental error in judgment. She'd assumed that because I'd been living quietly, I'd forgotten how to fight. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. I opened my laptop and began typing, muscle memory guiding my fingers as I accessed databases I hadn't touched in years. Within an hour, I had Brittany's full employment history, her credit report, and a very interesting pattern of short-term relationships with wealthy older men. 3 previous engagements, all broken off after the men discovered money missing from their accounts. 2 restraining orders filed against her by former boyfriends. 1 arrest for check fraud that had been mysteriously dropped. Brittany wasn't just a gold digger. She was a predator with a system, and my son was her latest mark. But she'd picked the wrong family this time. I gathered the documents and locked them back in the box, then pulled out a small black notebook I hadn't opened in decades. Inside were phone numbers, names, contacts from my old life, people who owed me favors, people who might be very interested to know that Janet Morrison was still alive. Because if Brittany wanted to play games with my past, she was about to discover that some ghosts were better left buried, and that some people were far more dangerous when you backed them into a corner. I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in 25 years. Not Joanne Patterson, the quiet single mother. Janet Morrison was staring back at me, and she was ready for war. The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken dreams. I sat in the hallway outside Courtroom B watching lawyers in expensive suits hurry past with their briefcases and their certainty. Patricia sat beside me, occasionally glancing at her watch and muttering about delays. Judge Morrison is running 20 minutes behind, she said, checking her phone. Traffic accident on the interstate backed everything up. Judge Morrison. The name meant nothing to Patricia, but it hit me like a freight train. David Morrison. It couldn't be the same person, could it? I pulled out my phone and searched for Judge David Morrison's Superior Court. The photo that loaded made my hands shake. Older, grayer, wearing the dignified bearing of a man who'd spent decades on the bench. But those eyes were the same ones that had looked at me 32 years ago with desperate gratitude when I handed him the evidence that cleared his name. David Morrison, the young public defender I'd saved from a trumped-up bribery charge when I was just starting out as a private investigator. The man whose career I'd rescued by proving his accuser was lying, his evidence fabricated by the same corrupt officials I'd later bring down. Patricia, I whispered, I need to use the restroom. She nodded absently, still scrolling through emails. I walked to the bathroom on unsteady legs, gripping the sink as I stared at my reflection. 32 years. Would he recognize me? Did I want him to? When I returned, the bailiff was calling our case. Patterson versus Patterson, docket number 4792. We filed into the courtroom, and I kept my eyes down as we took our seats at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, Sean sat with his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in a power suit who looked like she charged $500 an hour to ruin families. Brittany sat behind them, wearing a demure navy dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. All rise for the Honorable Judge David Morrison. I stood with everyone else, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I finally looked up, our eyes met across the courtroom and time stopped. He froze. Completely, utterly froze, his mouth slightly open, the papers in his hand forgotten. For a moment that felt like an eternity, we stared at each other, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. Not of Joanne Patterson, suburban single mother. Recognition of Janet Morrison, the woman who had saved his life and career when he was just 28 years old. Your Honor? The court reporter looked up expectantly. Judge Morrison blinked, shaking his head slightly as if clearing water from his ears. Yes, please. Be seated. His voice was rougher than it should have been, and his eyes kept drifting back to me with a mixture of shock and something that might have been concern. Sean's lawyer stood up, launching into her opening statement about familial obligation and the responsibilities of wealthy parents to their struggling children. She painted a picture of me as a selfish woman hoarding money while my son suffered, unable to provide for his future wife. My client, Sean Patterson, is seeking $280,000 in damages for emotional distress and financial neglect, she continued. Mrs. Patterson has a documented net worth of over $800,000, yet refuses to help her son in his time of need. $800,000. I almost laughed. If they only knew. Patricia stood for our response, outlining my history of supporting Sean, the college tuition I'd paid, the business loans I'd co-signed, the countless times I'd bailed him out of financial trouble. This is not a case of neglect, Your Honor. This is a case of an adult son who feels entitled to his mother's life savings to support an extravagant lifestyle. Throughout the proceedings, I could feel Judge Morrison's eyes on me. He was struggling to maintain his composure, and I wondered if anyone else could see it. Finally, he called for a recess. "Counselors, I need to see you in my chambers immediately." Patricia looked confused as we followed the judge's clerk down a narrow hallway. Judge Morrison's chambers were exactly what I had expected. Law books, diplomas, a photo of him shaking hands with the governor. He gestured for us to sit, then closed the door carefully. "I need to declare a conflict of interest in this case," he said without preamble. Sean's lawyer frowned. "Your Honor, I don't understand. Do you have a relationship with one of the parties?" Judge Morrison looked directly at me, and I saw 3 decades of questions in his eyes. "I have a history with the defendant, a professional relationship from many years ago that would make it inappropriate for me to preside over this case." "What kind of professional relationship?" Patricia asked. "Mrs. Patterson once provided investigative services that were significant to my career." His voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the weight behind his words. "I'll be recusing myself and requesting a different judge be assigned." "Your Honor," Sean's lawyer interjected, "with respect, this seems highly irregular. What exactly is the nature of this conflict?" Judge Morrison stood up, his hands flat on his desk. "That's not your concern, Counselor. The case will be reassigned within the week. Court is adjourned." As we filed out of his chambers, Judge Morrison caught my arm gently. "Mrs. Patterson, might I have a word privately?" Patricia looked between us, clearly puzzled, but I nodded. "I'll meet you in the hallway, Patricia." When we were alone, Judge Morrison sank into his chair, looking suddenly older than his 60-plus years. "Janet Morrison," he said quietly, "I thought you were dead." "I was supposed to be." He nodded slowly. "The car accident, the river. I remember reading about it." He looked up at me with those same earnest eyes I remembered from decades ago. "But you're not dead. You're here, being sued by your own son who apparently has no idea who his mother really is. It was safer that way." "Safer from who? The Castellano family? They've been out of power for 15 years, Janet. Most of them are dead or in prison." I sat down across from him, feeling exhausted. "Old habits die hard, David, and it's Joanne now." "Joanne." He tested the name, then shook his head. "I owe you my life, you know. If you hadn't found that evidence, if you hadn't proven that Castellanos people planted those drugs in my car, you don't owe me anything. I owe you everything." He leaned forward. "That investigation you did, the work you put in to clear my name, it gave me back my future. I became a prosecutor because of you, then a judge. Every person I've helped, every piece of justice I've been able to serve, it all traces back to what you did for me." The weight of his words settled over me like a blanket. I'd saved his career, and he'd spent 30 years making good use of it. "Why are you here, Janet? I mean, Joanne? Why are you living like this, hiding who you are? And why is your son suing you?" I told him everything about Brittany, about the threats, about the mysterious text messages from someone who knew my real identity, about 25 years of keeping Sean safe by keeping him ignorant. When I finished, Judge Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "You know," he said finally, "there are ways to handle predators like this Brittany. Legal ways, ways that don't require you to keep hiding." "David." "Judge Morrison in public," he corrected with a slight smile. "But in private, I'm still the scared young lawyer you saved all those years ago, and I think it's time someone returned the favor." He pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. "This is the number for Detective Sarah Chen. She runs the Financial Crimes Unit now. Tell her I sent you and tell her you have information about a pattern of relationship fraud. Don't mention your real name unless you have to." I took the card, my fingers trembling slightly. "David, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." He stood up, his judicial bearing returning. "Your son is going to learn the truth eventually, Joanne. The question is whether he learns it from you or from people who want to hurt you both." As I left his chambers, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Hope. Not just that I could protect Sean, but that maybe, just maybe, I could stop running. In the hallway, Patricia was pacing, her face tight with confusion. "Joanne, what the hell was that about? How do you know Judge Morrison, and why did he recuse? Himself?" "It's complicated," I said, the same words I'd been using for 25 years. "Complicated doesn't begin to cover this," she replied. "The opposing counsel is already filing motions, claiming judicial misconduct. They want to know why a sitting judge has a conflict of interest with a suburban single mother." I looked back toward Judge Morrison's chambers, where he was probably already making calls to ensure the case got assigned to someone who would handle it fairly. Someone who wouldn't have 30 years of gratitude clouding their judgment. "Patricia," I said quietly, "how long have we known each other?" 28 years, since your divorce." "Why?" "In all that time, have I ever lied to you?" She considered this. "No. Omitted things maybe. Been mysterious about your past, but never lied. I'm not lying now when I tell you that everything is about to change. For Sean, for me, for this whole situation, and when it does, I'm going to need you to trust me." Patricia studied my face, and I saw the exact moment she realized she'd never really known me at all. "Jesus, Joanne, who are you really?" I thought about Judge Morrison's words, about Detective Chen's card in my pocket, about the choice I was going to have to make. Keep hiding and hope Brittany got bored, or step back into the light and deal with the consequences. "I'm someone who's been hiding for a very long time," I said, "but I think it's time to stop." The next hearing was scheduled for the following week, with a new judge who wouldn't recognize me. But by then, if everything went according to plan, the person sitting at the defendant's table wouldn't be the same woman who'd walked into David Morrison's courtroom that morning. It was time for Sean to meet his real mother, and for Brittany to discover exactly what kind of person she'd been trying to blackmail. The coffee shop meeting never happened. At 9:45 a.m., I was sitting 3 tables away from the designated spot when I watched Detective Sarah Chen arrest a man I recognized from newspaper photos taken 20 years ago. Vincent "Vinny" Torino, former lieutenant in the Castellano organization, apparently just released from a 15-year stint in federal prison. He'd been the one sending the anonymous texts, trying to pick up where his old bosses had left off. The same vindictive thinking that had landed his family in prison in the first place. "How did you know he'd be there?" I asked Detective Chen an hour later, sitting in her office while Vinny cooled his heels in a holding cell. "Judge Morrison called me last night," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Told me someone was trying to extort a witness from an old case. When you described the threats, I ran the pattern through our database. Vinny's been making similar approaches to 3 other people from that original investigation." 3 others? All living under assumed names, all threatened with exposure if they didn't pay up. He's been doing this for months, ever since he got out. She leaned back in her chair. The man never learned that revenge is a luxury you can't afford when you're already at the bottom. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by a new worry. What about Brittany? She's still out there? Still threatening Sean? Detective Chen smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "About that, Judge Morrison wasn't the only person who made calls last night. It turns out your future daughter-in-law has warrants in 2 states. Fraud, identity theft, and violation of a restraining order in California." "Warrants?" "She's been very busy. The California warrant is particularly interesting. Apparently, she convinced a 70-year-old widower to liquidate his retirement account for a business investment that never materialized. When he tried to report her, she filed a countersuit claiming he'd sexually assaulted her. I felt sick. Did he? Security cameras from his assisted living facility proved otherwise. She's facing federal charges for elder abuse and fraud." Detective Chen pulled out a file thick with documents. "We've been tracking her for 6 months, but she kept moving, changing names. Your son's lawsuit actually helped us locate her." The irony was bitter. Sean's attempt to destroy me had led directly to his fiancée's arrest. "When will you take her into custody?" "We already did. This morning, about an hour after we picked up Vinny. She was at your son's apartment packing to leave town." My phone buzzed with a call from Sean. I'd been ignoring him since yesterday, but now I should take this. Detective Chen nodded. Go ahead. But don't tell him about the arrests yet. Let him figure some things out on his own first. I stepped into the hallway and answered. Sean. Mom, where the hell is Brittany? His voice was frantic, scared. She was supposed to meet me for lunch, but she never showed. Her phone goes straight to voicemail, and half her stuff is gone from my apartment. I don't know, son. This is all your fault. The words exploded out of him. If you just helped us, if you just written the damn check, none of this would be happening. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 25 years of lies pressing down on me. Sean, there are things you don't understand. Like what? Like how my own mother can watch me struggle and not lift a finger to help? Like how you can sit on hundreds of thousands of dollars while I'm getting sued by creditors? You're not getting sued by creditors. You're suing me. Because I have no choice. Because you won't. He stopped, and I heard him take a shaky breath. Mom, I found something in Brittany's things. Documents with your name on them, but not the right name. And pictures. Old pictures of you that looked nothing like how you look now. My heart stopped. What kind of documents? Employment records from something called Morrison Investigations and a newspaper clipping about some corruption case from before I was born. His voice got quieter. Mom, who is Janet Morrison? The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I'd been afraid to cross for his entire life. I could lie. I could deflect. I could keep protecting him from the truth. Or I could trust him with it. She's me, I said quietly. She was me. Silence. Then, what do you mean? I mean, Janet Morrison was my name before I became Joanne Patterson. Before I moved to Millbrook. Before I decided that keeping you safe was more important than being myself. I don't understand. I was a private investigator, Sean. A good one. I specialized in corporate fraud, corruption cases, domestic surveillance. I had a license, an office, employees. I was successful. But why did you change your name? Why did you give all that up? I leaned against the wall, feeling every one of my 61 years, because I saved the wrong person's life, and it almost got us both killed. I told him everything about the Castellano investigation, about Judge Morrison, about the threats that forced me underground, about the choice I had made to die on paper so he could live freely. When you were 7 years old, I said, 3 men came to our house in the middle of the night. They wanted me to recant my testimony, to say I'd lied about the evidence. When I refused, they made it clear that you were their next target. Jesus, Mom. So Janet Morrison died in a car accident that never happened, and Joanne Patterson moved to a quiet town where no one asked questions about a single mother with a fresh start. I gave up everything, my career, my identity, my life, to keep you safe. But why didn't you tell me? All these years, why didn't you? Because the best way to protect a secret is to never tell it. Because I wanted you to have a normal childhood, not one where you looked over your shoulder and jumped at shadows. Because I thought I could keep you safe forever by keeping you ignorant. The silence stretched so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, the money, the savings you have, that's from before, isn't it? From when you were Janet Morrison. Some of it. I was careful, diversified, moved things around. Enough to disappear completely if I had to. $800,000. His voice was numb. Closer to 1.2 million, actually. Your lawyer's research wasn't very thorough. Another long pause. Brittany knew, didn't she? She knew who you really were. She found pieces. Enough to threaten me, but not enough to understand what she was threatening. And now she's gone. I walked back toward Detective Chen's office. Sean, I need you to come down to the police station. There are some things you need to know about Brittany. Things that have nothing to do with me or my past. What kind of things? The kind that are going to make you very grateful she's out of your life. An hour later, Sean sat, Across from Detective Chen's desk, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and humiliation as she laid out Brittany's criminal history. The fake names, the previous victims, the pattern of targeting lonely or vulnerable men. She chose you specifically, Detective Chen explained. Did research on your family, found out about your mother's financial situation. The whole relationship was a setup from day one. Sean buried his face in his hands. I'm such an idiot. No, I said firmly. You're a trusting person who fell for a very skilled predator. There's a difference. But I sued you, Mom. I actually took you to court. He looked up at me with eyes red from shame. And all this time you were protecting me. You gave up everything to protect me, and I repaid you by trying to destroy you. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have trusted you. You've never let me down, not once in my entire life. And the first time some woman tells me you're the villain, I believe her. Detective Chen cleared her throat. If it helps, Mr. Patterson, you weren't the first son she's turned against his mother. The pattern is always the same. Isolate the victim from his support system, create financial pressure, then present herself as the solution. Will she go to prison? For a very long time. Federal charges carry serious sentences, especially for elder abuse. She handed Sean a business card. You'll need to testify, but the evidence is overwhelming. Your cooperation will help put her away permanently. As we walked out of the police station together, Sean stopped on the front steps. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay? Are you proud of me? I mean, before all this happened, before Brittany, before I became this entitled brat who sued his own mother, were you proud of the man I'd become? The question broke my heart. Sean, I have been proud of you every single day of your life. Even when you were making mistakes, even when you were hurting me, I never stopped being proud. You're kind, you're intelligent, you work hard. You just fell for someone who was very good at manipulation. I want to drop the lawsuit. I know. And I want to pay you back every penny you spent on me over the years, college, rent, the business loans. I know it's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I want to make it right. I put my hand on his arm. That's not necessary. It is to me. He looked out at the parking lot where my old Honda sat next to his BMW. I've been thinking about what you said, about giving up your career to protect me. Do you ever regret it? I considered the question seriously. 25 years of hiding, of living smaller than I was, of watching from the sidelines while other people built the kind of career I'd given up. No, I said finally. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that there are people in this world who would threaten a child to get revenge on his mother. But I don't regret the choice. You were worth it. Sean wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. What happens now? Do you go back to being Janet Morrison? I don't know. I've been Joanne Patterson for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be anyone else. Maybe you could be both. Joanne Patterson with Janet Morrison's skills? I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't noticed before. He wasn't the naive boy who'd fallen for Brittany's schemes. The experience had changed him, aged him, given him a hard-earned wisdom about trusting the wrong people. Maybe I could, I said. But first, we have a lawsuit to dismiss and a relationship to rebuild. And Mom? He turned to face me fully. Next time someone threatens you, don't handle it alone. I may not be a private investigator, but I'm your son. And sons are supposed to protect their mothers, too. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, really smiled. Janet Morrison had spent 30 years protecting everyone else. Maybe it was time to let someone protect her. 3 weeks after Brittany's arrest, I was sitting in Patricia's office signing the papers to dismiss Sean's lawsuit when she asked the question I'd been dreading. So what's the real story, Joanne? And don't give me any more mysterious non-answers. After 30 years, I think I've earned the truth. I set down the pen and looked at my lawyer, my friend, the woman who had helped me navigate my divorce when I was still pretending to be someone I wasn't. The real story is that I used to be very good at finding people who didn't want to be found. And sometimes the people you find don't appreciate being found. You were a private investigator, among other things. I pulled out my phone and showed her a news article I'd bookmarked. Remember the Castellano corruption scandal from the early 90s? The one that brought down half the city council? Patricia's eyes widened as she read. Janet Morrison, the investigator who broke the case wide open. She looked up at me, understanding dawning. That's you? That was me. Jesus Christ, Joanne. You brought down the most powerful crime family in the state. No wonder you went into hiding. She set the phone down carefully. But why come out now? What's changed? Before I could answer, my phone rang. Detective Chen's name appeared on the screen. Excuse me, I told Patricia, stepping into the hallway. Sarah, what's the update? We got a problem, Detective Chen said without preamble. Brittany's talking. She's trying to cut a deal by giving up information about other scams she's been running. One of them involves your son's business. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Apparently, she didn't just target Sean romantically. She also invested $25,000 in his consulting firm 6 months ago, money that came from one of her elderly victims in California. Sean doesn't know? Not yet. The money came through a shell company she set up. On paper, it looks like a legitimate investor. But it's stolen money, Joanne, which means his business is technically built on the proceeds of elder fraud. I closed my eyes, leaning against the wall. Even from prison, Brittany was still poisoning our lives. What does this mean for Sean? If the feds want to be hard-nosed about it, they could seize his business assets as proceeds of crime. More likely, they'll just want the money back, but that could bankrupt him. How much? The original $25,000 plus 6 months of profits she's entitled to as an investor. Probably close to $40,000 total. $40,000. For most people, a devastating blow. For me, barely a dent in my hidden savings. Sarah, if I pay back the victim directly, can we keep Sean out of this? Possibly. But you'd have to move fast, and you'd have to do it quietly. Once the federal prosecutors get involved, it becomes a lot more complicated. After I hung up, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, thinking about patterns, about how the past keeps reaching forward to complicate the present, about how protecting the people you love sometimes means making decisions they wouldn't want you to make. I went back into Patricia's office and told her about the call. So what are you going to do? She asked. What I always do, protect my son. By paying $40,000 to cover up his connection to a federal crime? By paying $40,000 to protect an innocent man from the consequences of trusting the wrong person? Patricia shook her head. You know, most mothers would tell their adult children about these things. Let them make their own decisions. Most mothers didn't spend 25 years learning that some knowledge is too dangerous to share. But even as I said it, I wondered if I was making the same mistake again. Sean had been angry when he discovered I'd hidden my past from him. How would he react if he found out I was still making unilateral decisions about his life? My phone buzzed with a text from him. Mom, can we have dinner tonight? I want to talk to you about something. Something in his tone worried me. I texted back. Of course. 7 p.m. at Marcello's. Actually, could you come to my apartment? I'm cooking. Sean hadn't cooked for me since college. Whatever he wanted to discuss, it was serious. I spent the afternoon handling Brittany's victim situation, making calls to Detective Chen, arranging for a wire transfer that would quietly repay the stolen money without involving Sean. By 6:30, I was standing outside his apartment building, holding a bottle of wine and wondering what new crisis was about to unfold. Sean answered the door, wearing an apron that said "Kiss the Cook," a Christmas gift from me 3 years ago that I'd never seen him use. The apartment smelled like garlic and herbs, and I could hear jazz playing softly in the background. This is nice, I said, looking around. He'd cleaned thoroughly, removed all traces of Brittany's presence, rearranged the furniture to make it feel like his space again. I wanted to do something for you, he said, taking my coat. After everything I put you through, the least I can do is make you a decent meal. We sat down to pasta with homemade sauce, salad, and bread that was clearly from the expensive bakery downtown. Sean poured wine and we ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before he cleared his throat. Mom, I've been thinking about what you told me, about your past, about what you gave up. Sean, let me finish. He set down his fork. I've been thinking about it, and I have some questions. My chest tightened. Okay. Do you miss it? The work, I mean, being Janet Morrison. The question caught me off guard. Sometimes I was good at it. More than good. I did some research after you told me. Janet Morrison wasn't just any private investigator. You were considered one of the best in the business. Corporate fraud, missing persons, corruption cases. You had a 93% success rate. You researched me? I researched my mother. He smiled slightly. Both versions of her. And I discovered something interesting. He got up and returned with a folder full of printouts. Newspaper articles, professional profiles, case summaries, a career's worth of accomplishments I'd never told him about. According to this, he said, opening the folder, Janet Morrison solved over 300 cases in 15 years. She recovered $8.7 million in stolen assets. She helped put 42 criminals in prison. She saved 17 marriages and found 31 missing persons. Sean, where are you going with this? I'm going toward the fact that my mother was a hero, and I want to know if she'd like to be a hero again. He pulled out a business card and slid it across the table. It was cream-colored, expensive cardstock with simple black lettering. Morrison Investigations. Finding truth. Delivering justice. I had these made, he said quietly. I know you might not want to use your real name, but I thought, maybe it's time. I stared at the card, my vision blurring slightly. Sean, I can't just go back to being a private investigator. It's been 25 years. The laws have changed, the technology. So you'll learn. You're 61, not 91, and you're still the woman who brought down the Castellano family. The licensing alone would take months. I already looked into it. Your old license expired, but you can petition for reinstatement based on your previous record. Detective Chen said she'd be a reference. I picked up the card, running my thumb over the raised lettering. You want me to start over, at my age? I want you to stop hiding. He reached across the table and took my hand. Mom, for 25 years, you've been living like a ghost. You gave up everything to protect me, and I love you for that. But I'm a grown man now. I can protect myself, and maybe it's time for the world to remember what Janet Morrison was capable of. It's not that simple, isn't it? He squeezed my hand. You just spent 3 weeks dismantling Brittany's entire operation. You connected dots that professional detectives missed. You protected me from consequences I didn't even know existed. You're still her mom. You're still Janet Morrison. You just forgot for a while. I thought about Detective Chen's call, about the money I'd quietly transferred to protect Sean from Brittany's crimes, about Judge Morrison's words in his chambers, about Patricia's question, what's changed? What had changed was that I was tired of hiding, tired of being smaller than I was, tired of pretending that Joanne Patterson was enough when Janet Morrison was still inside me, still capable, still needed. There's something I need to tell you, I said. Sean's expression grew concerned. What? I told him about Brittany's investment in his company, about the stolen money, about the transfer I'd made that afternoon. His face went through several emotions: shock, anger, gratitude, frustration. You paid $40,000 without telling me? I protected you from a federal crime investigation by making decisions about my life without consulting me. He ran his hands through his hair. Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're still trying to handle everything alone. I was trying to protect me, I know. But I don't need protecting anymore. I need a partner, someone who trusts me enough to let me help carry the load. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. If you're going to be Janet Morrison again, you can't keep being Joanne Patterson, too. You can't keep hiding things from the people who love you. What are you saying? He turned back to me. I'm saying if you restart Morrison Investigations, I want to work with you. Sean, you have your own business? Built on stolen money, apparently. He laughed bitterly. Maybe it's time for a career change anyway. You don't know anything about investigative work. I know about business, about finance, about technology, and I know about being betrayed by someone you trust. His voice got quieter. I know what it feels like to need someone to find the truth when everyone else is lying to you. I looked at the business card again, at the name I'd carried in secret for 25 years. Janet Morrison, the woman who'd been buried in a car accident that never happened. It would be dangerous, I said finally. The work we'd take on, the people we'd be investigating, it's not always safe. Neither is hiding. We'd have to start small, build a reputation all over again. We'd have each other. I stood up and walked to him at the window. Below us, the city sprawled out in all directions, full of secrets and lies, and people who needed someone to find the truth. Partners? I asked. Partners, he confirmed. For the first time in 25 years, I felt like myself again. Not Joanne Patterson, the woman who'd spent decades making herself smaller and quieter and safer. Janet Morrison, the woman who found people who didn't want to be found. And this time, she wouldn't be working alone. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of our new office, watching Sean install the last piece of surveillance equipment we'd need for our first major case. The frosted glass door read Morrison and Associates Investigations in gold lettering, and every time I saw it, I felt a small thrill of recognition. I was Janet Morrison again. Officially, legally, completely. The process had been more complicated than Sean had anticipated. Reinstating my private investigator's license required testimony from 3 character witnesses, including Judge Morrison and Detective Chen. I'd had to sit for updated certification exams, prove my knowledge of current technology, and undergo a thorough background check that nearly gave me panic attacks until I remembered that Janet Morrison had nothing to hide. The most difficult part had been the legal resurrection. Changing my name back, updating Social Security records, dealing with banks and credit agencies that couldn't understand how someone could be legally dead for 25 years and then come back to life. Patricia had handled most of it, muttering about paperwork nightmares and bureaucratic impossibilities. The cameras are live, Sean announced, climbing down from a stepladder. Motion-activated night vision feeds directly to the secured server. We're ready for Mrs. Kellerman tomorrow. Mrs. Kellerman was our first real client, a 72-year-old widow who suspected her live-in caregiver was stealing from her but couldn't prove it. The local police had dismissed her concerns as the paranoid delusions of an aging mind. Her children thought she was developing dementia. But Mrs. Kellerman had tracked our activities through Detective Chen, who'd mentioned our services to victims of elder abuse. She'd driven 90 minutes to our office, sat across from my desk, and told her story with the clear, sharp intelligence of someone whose mind was perfectly intact. They think I'm crazy, she said, but I know what I know. Money is disappearing from my accounts. Jewelry is going missing. And that woman, Sandra, she thinks I'm too old and stupid to notice. It was exactly the kind of case Janet Morrison had always excelled at. The overlooked victim, the predator hiding in plain sight, the truth that everyone else was too busy or too biased to see. Are you nervous? Sean asked, packing away his tools. About tomorrow? No. About being back in this business? I considered the question. A little. The truth was, I felt more like myself than I had in decades. During the months of preparation as we'd set up the office and taken courses and rebuilt my credentials, I'd remembered why I'd loved this work. The puzzle of human behavior, the satisfaction of uncovering hidden truths, the justice of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. But I was also 61 years old, working with technology that hadn't existed when I was last in the field. The learning curve had been steep, and there were moments when I'd wondered if I was too old to start over. Mom? Sean said, using the tone that meant he had something serious to say. I want you to know something. What's that? These last 6 months, watching you become yourself again, it's been incredible. You're more confident, more engaged, more alive than I've ever seen you. I smiled, touching the nameplate on my desk. I forgot how good it felt to be good at something. You were always good at things. You just convinced yourself that being small was safer. It was safer. For you. But not for you. He sat down across from my desk in the chair where clients would sit. I've been thinking about that a lot. About how you spent 25 years making yourself smaller to protect me. And I realized something. What? You weren't just protecting me from physical danger. You were protecting me from guilt, from feeling responsible for the sacrifices you made. The observation was so insightful it took my breath away. Sean? But here's the thing, Mom. I am responsible. Not for your choices, those were yours to make, but for making sure they weren't wasted. For making sure that when you were ready to be yourself again, I was strong enough to stand beside you instead of behind you. I felt tears threatening and blinked them back. You've grown up. I had to. My partner expects excellence. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Chen. Heads up. Brittany was sentenced today. 15 years federal, no parole. Thought you'd want to know? I showed Sean the message and he nodded grimly. Good. She won't be manipulating anyone else's family. Are you sorry about how everything happened with her? He considered this. I'm sorry it happened the way it did. I'm sorry she hurt you. I'm sorry I let her turn me against you. He paused. But I'm not sorry it led us here. To this. A knock on the door interrupted us. Through the frosted glass, I could see the silhouette of a woman. Our first walk-in client. Are you ready for this? Sean asked. I straightened my shoulders, feeling Janet Morrison settle into place like a familiar coat. I'm ready. The woman who entered was probably in her 40s, well-dressed but with the slightly frantic look of someone who'd been carrying a burden too long alone. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like armor. Morrison Investigations? She asked. That's right. I'm Janet Morrison, and this is my associate, Sean Patterson. How can we help you? She sat down, still gripping the folder. My name is Linda Hayes. My daughter disappeared 3 weeks ago. The words hit me like electricity. Missing persons cases had always been my specialty, and my success rate had been legendary. But they were also the most emotionally demanding, the most personal, the most likely to haunt you if you failed. Have you contacted the police? Sean asked. Of course. But Jessica is 23 and she left voluntarily. They say she's an adult with the right to disappear if she wants to, but she wouldn't just leave. Not without telling me. Not without a word. Linda opened the folder, revealing photographs, phone records, bank statements. Something happened to her, I know it, and the police won't listen because she's not a perfect victim. She's had problems with drugs, with bad relationships. They think she just ran off with some guy. But you don't think so, I said. I know so. Jessica was clean. She'd been sober for 8 months, had a job, was talking about going back to school. She was getting her life together. Linda's voice broke slightly. And now she's gone, and everyone acts like it's inevitable, like girls like Jessica are disposable. I looked at Sean, seeing my own thoughts reflected in his eyes. This was why we did this work. For the Linda Hayes of the world, the mothers whose children fell through the cracks because society had already written them off. We'll take the case, I said. Linda's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. The police detective gave me your name. Said if anyone could find Jessica, it would be Janet Morrison. After Linda left, Sean and I sat in our office as the sun set outside our window. 2 cases in one day. Mrs. Kellerman's theft investigation, and now Jessica Hayes' disappearance. You know, Sean said, I never asked you this before, but why did you become a private investigator in the first place? Before the Castellano case, before everything went wrong? I thought back to my early 20s, to the young woman who'd been so certain she could fix the world one case at a time. Because I was good at seeing patterns that other people missed, and because I believed that everyone deserved to have someone looking for the truth on their behalf. Do you still believe that? I looked around our office, at the equipment we'd installed, at the business cards stacked neatly on my desk, at the photograph I'd hung on the wall, a picture of Sean and me at his college graduation, both of us smiling, both of us unaware of the storms that lay ahead. I believe it more than ever, I said. My phone rang. The number was local but unfamiliar. Morrison Investigations, this is Janet. Ms. Morrison? This is Judge Morrison's clerk. The judge asked me to call and let you know that Vincent Torino was sentenced today. 22 years for extortion and threatening a federal witness. He won't be bothering anyone again. After I hung up, Sean raised an eyebrow. Good news? The best kind. The past is finally officially closed. As we locked up the office and walked to our cars, I realized something that would have shocked Joanne Patterson, but felt completely natural to Janet Morrison. I wasn't tired. Despite a full day of work, despite the emotional weight of Linda Hayes' story, despite the pressure of starting over at 61, I felt energized. I felt like I could handle whatever walked through our door tomorrow. Mom, Sean called as I reached my car. I'm proud of you for coming back, for trusting me to come with you, for being brave enough to be yourself again. I'm proud of you too, I called back, for growing up to be someone worth coming back for. As I drove home through the streets of the city I'd once protected as Janet Morrison, I thought about cycles, about how the past could reach forward to destroy you or to save you, depending on how you chose to meet it. 25 years ago, I'd chosen safety over authenticity, hiding over fighting, protection over partnership. Those choices had been necessary then, had kept Sean safe during the years when he needed safety most, but safety had always been temporary. Eventually, you had to choose between remaining hidden and living fully. I'd spent a quarter century as Joanne Patterson, and she'd served her purpose. She'd raised a good man, kept dangerous secrets, survived in the shadows. But Janet Morrison? She'd always been meant for the light. Tomorrow, Mrs. Kellerman would get justice. Linda Hayes would get answers about her daughter, and I would get what I'd been missing for 25 years, the chance to be exactly who I was meant to be. Some secrets were worth keeping. Others were prisons you built for yourself. The difference was knowing when it was time to walk free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.